He built an empire on fear. He had one rule: never show what you love, because love becomes a weapon in the hands of your enemies. For 28 years, Dominic Vasquez kept every wall up and every door locked. Then a 7-year-old girl with hollow green eyes and broken flip-flops walked through the one door he forgot to guard, the one that led straight to his heart. This is the channel where we tell the stories nobody expects. A mafia boss learning to braid hair, a traumatized child learning the word safe for the very first time, and families that are forged not in comfort, but in survival. The greatest act of strength is not power over others. It is choosing to protect the most vulnerable, even when it costs you everything. The story deserves to be heard. Like it, share it, comment what it stirred in you, and subscribe, because we show up every day with stories that remind you what it truly means to be human.
She glanced down at her own small body. She wore a huge t-shirt full of holes that hung down below her thighs. Her shorts were paper thin, not meant for winter. The flip-flops on her feet were so worn out that the soles had cracked open. The temperature was 5 degrees below zero, and she was dressed for a summer day. Dried blood caked her inner thigh, a souvenir from running, from getting away, from the man her mother had welcomed into their apartment last night. A burn mark on her left arm showed from under her torn sleeve. It was a perfect circle. 2 weeks ago, Marcus had pushed a lit cigarette against her skin because she had dropped one of his packages. Emma did not even shiver. Her body had given up on reacting to the cold months, maybe even years ago. She could not remember. She lifted her little hand and knocked 3 times on the door. The noise bounced off the alley walls. The snow kept falling. A rat scurried right past her feet. She did not even flinch. The seconds ticked by. 10, 20, 30. Emma continued to wait. There was nowhere else for her to go. She had trekked for 3 hours through the freezing city to find this specific place. Her feet were completely numb. Her lips had turned a dark shade of purple, but she stood her ground. This was her one and only shot. The door swung open. A man filled the entire doorway. He was tall and huge, with shoulders as wide as a wall. His head was shaved clean, and a scar sliced across his throat. His eyes were a very pale blue, and they looked completely empty. Viktor Morozov gazed down. He saw a small child in flip-flops in the snow, her lips the color of old bruises. Her eyes were not the eyes of a child. They belonged to a person who had witnessed too much and endured too much in a very short life. Those were the eyes of a fighter. Viktor said nothing. He asked no questions. He did not ask why a child, nearly frozen solid, was standing at the back entrance of Chicago's most dangerous club at almost 3 o'clock in the morning. He just moved out of the way. Emma entered. The hall was dark and stretched out before her. Music was pulsing from somewhere deep inside the club. The bass vibrated through the floor, but Viktor did not take her toward the sound. He made a left, then a right, and went down a flight of stairs. Emma trailed behind him without a single question. A long time ago, she had learned that questions only earned you a slap. They came to a stop before a thick wooden door. Viktor knocked twice, waited a moment, then knocked one more time. It was a signal. The door was open from the other side. Emma stepped into a room full of monsters. 11 men were seated around a giant table carved from black oak. The air was heavy with the smell of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Every single man was dressed in a suit. Every single man had tattoos that crawled up their necks and snaked across their knuckles, vanishing under their shirt collars. Maps were laid out on the table. Red circles identified territories. Blue lines marked off boundaries. They were meeting about growth, about conflict, about topics a 7-year-old girl could never hope to grasp. All the talking stopped. Every pair of eyes in the room turned to stare at her. Emma walked straight ahead. The slapping sound of her flip-flops echoed on the concrete floor. She did not look at the men sitting on either side of her. She did not even blink when one of them moved in his chair. She had survived Marcus Kane for 2 years. She had been beaten, burned, starved, and locked away in closets. These men and their fancy suits did not frighten her. Nothing could frighten her now. She had run out of fear a very long time ago. At the very head of the table sat a man who was not like the others. He wore a black vest over a white shirt with the top button open, but no tie. A tiny scar cut right through his left eyebrow. His hair was dark, but threaded with silver at his temples. His jawline was so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. But it was his eyes that made Emma freeze. They were black. So black, they were like staring into a deep, endless hole. He was completely still. Everyone else had shown some reaction when she came in. This man had not moved a muscle. Emma had no idea who the boss was. She could not figure out the power structure of criminals, but she did understand one simple rule. The most important person always sits at the head of the table. She came to a halt right in front of him. "Are you the one who makes bad people disappear?" Her voice was raspy and raw. She had not had anything to drink in 2 days. The words felt like they were scraping her throat. A young tough guy at the other end of the table let out a laugh. Victor's head snapped in his direction. Just one look. The laughing stopped immediately. Dominic Vasquez showed no reaction. He did not smile, and he did not frown. He just leaned forward in his seat and observed the little girl standing before him. He noticed the burn on her arm. He noticed the bruises shaped like fingers that were wrapped around her throat. He noticed the dried blood on her tiny legs. He noticed how her collarbone stuck out from under her thin skin. But more than anything, he noticed her eyes. They were green. They were beautiful. They were eyes that should have belonged to a little girl who played with dolls and believed in happy endings. But instead, they were hollow, lifeless. They were the eyes of a person who had already lost all hope in the world. Deep inside Dominic's chest, something fractured. A memory broke through to the surface. A little girl with dark hair and a smile missing a tooth. 8 years old, laughing in the sunshine. Isabella. His sister's face appeared over the face of this shattered child. Dominic lifted one hand in a small, silent motion. Every man in the room got to his feet, their chairs scraping loudly on the concrete. They filed out of the room without saying a word. The door shut behind them with a heavy sound. Now only 3 people were left, Dominic, Victor, and Emma. There was only silence. Dominic finally looked at the girl. His voice was soft. It was low. It was the voice of a man who never had to shout to be heard. "Which bad people?" Emma lifted up both of her hands. She took the collar of her giant shirt and pulled it down, showing him her shoulders, her chest, and her back. It was covered in scars, bruises, burns, and welts, with old injuries layered on top of new ones. It was a history of pain written on the body of a little girl who weighed less than 40 pounds. She looked him directly in his black eyes. All of them. For a long moment, Dominic did not move. He just stared at the scars that covered Emma's small frame, and something old and dangerous began to awaken behind his eyes. Victor. It was just one word. That was all he ever needed. Victor was already taking out his phone. "Dr. Chen, now." He stepped out of the room to place the call. The door closed, and Dominic was alone with the child. Emma pulled her shirt back up into place. She just stood there in the center of the room, waiting. She did not take a seat. She had not been told that she could sit. "What is your name?" "Emma?" "Emma what?" "I don't know. Marcus never said what my other name was." Dominic's jaw clenched. "Who is Marcus?" "He lives with my mom. He is not my father. My dad went away when I was very small." "How old are you?" "7, I think. Or maybe 8. I do not know when my birthday is." The questions kept coming. Dominic asked them in a slow, steady voice, and Emma answered. There was no emotion, and there were no tears. She just stated the facts of her life, as if she were reading a shopping list. She began delivering. It remained flat and hollow, as if she were talking about something that happened to a different person. Mom brought a man home. She told him. She said I knew how to be quiet. She said I would not cause any trouble. Dominic's hands balled into tight fists under the table. He tried to take my clothes off, so I bit him as hard as I could until I could taste blood. Then I ran. How long did you run? 3 hours? Perhaps longer. I had no idea where else to run. That is when I recalled what Marcus said about you. An absolute stillness settled over the room. Emma gazed at Dominic. Her green eyes were empty of hope or expectation, showing only a grim, observant calm. I can work for you, she stated. I am skilled at making deliveries. I am never noticed. The authorities do not bother with small children. I could be a great asset. I simply need a place where Marcus cannot get to me. Dominic was unable to form a word. His throat felt completely closed off. He had ordered men to their deaths without a second thought. He had seen people plead for their lives and felt absolutely nothing. But this child standing in front of him, offering to run his product in return for safety, had shattered something deep inside him. After 10 seconds of silence, Victor, who was standing near the door, shifted. He had ended the lives of 47 individuals. He had questioned men until they begged for him to finish them. He had never turned away from anything in his life. He turned away this time. Emma observed them both. She could not comprehend their behavior. She did not know why the large man with the scar had faced the wall. She was confused about why the man at the desk was speechless. Did I say something I should not have? Dominic managed to get the words out. No, you did not. In that case, will you protect me? Before he could respond, the door swung open. A woman entered. She was in her mid-40s with silver-threaded black hair tied back in a neat bun. She held a medical kit. Her expression was serene and professional, but her eyes were incredibly perceptive. Dr. Sarah Chen glanced at Emma, then at Dominic, and then her gaze returned to Emma. She knelt down to be at the child's level. Hello, dear. My name is Sarah, and I am a doctor. I am just going to see if you have any injuries. Would that be all right? Emma gave a small nod. She had long ago learned that defying adults was a bad idea. The checkup lasted about 15 minutes. Dr. Chen was quiet as she worked, her expression becoming more rigid with each new injury she found and noted. When she was done, she went into the hall with Dominic. Her voice was just above a whisper. This little girl has no right to be alive. She has 3 old rib fractures that did not heal properly. There are second-degree burns on her arm. She is severely malnourished. There are also indications of an attempted assault. She weighs 40 pounds. That is what a 4-year-old weighs. Dr. Chen's hand was shaking just a little. I cannot explain how she is even alive. I cannot fathom how she is still conscious. It is a mystery how she even managed to get here and speak so clearly. Dominic looked through the window at Emma, who was sitting perfectly still, in a chair, simply waiting. What is it that she needs? Everything, Dr. Chen replied. She is in need of everything. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the hallway next to Dominic. She was gripping her medical bag with white knuckles. Her tone was quiet and professional, but there was a fragility underneath it, as if she herself was about to break. 3 broken ribs, and they are old injuries. They mended the wrong way because nobody ever bothered to set them. Every time she takes a full breath, she experiences pain. She has been living with that pain for months, if not years. Dominic remained silent. He clenched his jaw so hard that the muscles in his neck stood out. A second-degree burn is on her left forearm, perfectly round, about the size of a lit cigarette. I found at least 4 others on her back, all in different stages of healing. Dr. Chen went on, her voice getting softer with every sentence. Extreme lack of nutrition. Her vitamin D levels are so low that her bones are becoming soft. Based on my assessment, she has not been in the sunlight for any significant amount of time in more than a year. She was deliberately kept hidden away indoors. She stopped for a moment. The words that followed were clearly the most difficult. There are clear signs of someone trying to assault her. It was not successful, but the bruise patterns show that it was attempted several times. She resisted and fought. Each time she resisted, Dominic dug his nails deep into his own palms. He could feel the skin breaking. He did not care. She weighs 40 pounds, Dr. Chen stated. A typical 7-year-old should be somewhere between 45 and 60 pounds. She is the size of a 4-year-old. Her development has been severely held back by hunger. Through the glass, Dominic saw Emma sitting by herself in the room. She had not budged an inch. Her hands were neatly folded on her lap. Her back was completely straight, and she was staring at the opposite wall. She waited with the patience of an animal trained that any movement would bring punishment. Dr. Chen saw where he was looking. When I asked her about the last time she ate, she could not recall. She guessed it might have been 2 days ago. She found something to eat in a trash can. There was a long silence. She does not know the date of her birth, Dr. Chen said gently. She does not know her last name. She has no idea how old she is. She asked me. For the first time, the doctor's professional calm began to crumble. She asked me if she needed to give me money for the checkup. She told me she had $7. She took it from Marcus's wallet just before she ran away. Dominic shut his eyes. $7. A child who had never been shown any compassion believed that everything had a cost, because in her life, it always had. He turned away from the window and took out his cell phone. The first call was to Marco, his tech expert. Marcus Kane, find me everything on him. His location, his police record, who he works with, his daily habits. I need it in 20 minutes. The second call was to his mother, Elena. Get the secure room at the shelter ready. There is a child, 7 years old, who has been through extreme trauma. She is going to require constant attention. The third call was to the club's kitchen. Soup. Something mild and warm. Take it to the private room, immediately. He ended the calls and went back into the room. Emma glanced up as he came in. Her eyes followed his every step, the way a cornered animal tracks a hunter. Constantly aware, always looking for a way out. Are you going to take me back to him? No. Are you going to put me to work? No. Then what is the reason you are helping me? Dominic did not have a response for her. At least not one that he could articulate. Not one he could give to a little girl who had never known a single act of genuine kindness. The food was brought in, a simple bowl of warm chicken soup. It was plain and would be gentle on her stomach. Emma looked at it as if it could be a trick. You can go ahead and eat, Dominic told her. She reached for the spoon. Her hands had a slight tremor. She took one small sip and then one more. She ate very slowly, not out of politeness, but because her system had almost forgotten how to handle regular food. When the bowl was half empty, she paused. Am I going to have to pay you for this? Dominic felt a knot tighten in his stomach. No. What will happen when Marcus comes for me? He is going to be very mad. He will harm anyone who helped me. He says that all the time. He says that nobody can ever keep me safe from him. Dominic crossed the room and kneeled down to meet her gaze. He made no move to touch her. He did not extend a hand. He instinctively knew that quick gestures would frighten her. He knew that for her, being touched was always linked to pain. He simply looked straight into her green eyes and said, Marcus Kane is never going to find you. He will never lay a hand on you again. And he will never cause harm to another person, ever again. Emma searched his face. She was looking for the deception. She was trying to find the flaw in his composure. She was waiting for the moment this new person would show he was just like all the others. She could not find one. Do you promise? Dominic kept his eyes locked on hers. I promise. For the very first time since she had entered that room, a tiny spark appeared in Emma's vacant eyes. It was not quite hope. Not yet. But it was the faint outline of something that could grow into hope if it was given enough time. Emma was asleep on the leather couch just moments after she put down her spoon. Her small body had finally shut down. 2 days with no meals, 3 hours fleeing through the cold city, and a lifetime of built-up weariness finally overwhelmed her. Dominic stood near the window. As he watched her sleep, he saw that she was curled up tightly, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was hugging a cushion as if it were a shield. Even while unconscious, her body stayed in a protective crouch. Even in her dreams, she was bracing for an attack. The image of her tore open a wound Dominic had spent 28 years trying to stitch closed. He was 8 years old again, back in a warehouse that reeked of rust and fuel. Ropes were cutting into his wrists. His sister was next to him, sobbing. Isabella, she was 8 as well, his twin, who was born 7 minutes after him. She had dark, wavy hair and a smile with a gap in it, and her laugh was like music. She always called him Dom because she had trouble saying Dominic when they were toddlers. The name just stayed with him. Their father, Ricardo Vasquez, was the head of the family before Dominic. He was a difficult man, a harsh man, a man who thought that any sign of vulnerability was an invitation for an attack. A rival crew snatched them on a Tuesday afternoon. They were pulled from the car when their driver was pumping gas, forced into a van, and driven for what seemed like an eternity. The demand for ransom arrived later that night. $2 million for the return of both children. Ricardo said no. "We will not engage with people like this," he announced to his crew. "If I give them money, every one of my rivals will see that my children can be used against me. They will be targets for the rest of their lives." The people who took them sent a reply. They made Dominic see it. Isabella cried out his name. She cried out for their father. She cried out to God. And then, her cries stopped. They released Dominic after that, left him on the front steps of his father's estate like a piece of trash. He was a message, a warning, a clear signal of what would happen to the children of men who would not pay. Dominic did not utter a single word for 2 years following that night. The professionals called it severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it selective mutism. They gave it many names, but none of them changed the truth that his sister was gone, and he had been made to witness it. Ricardo passed away 5 years later from a heart attack. Some speculated it was the pressure. Others whispered it was from guilt. Dominic did not care either way. He felt nothing at all as they put his father's casket into the earth. He took over as the boss at 21. The very first order he gave was to find every single person who was involved in. It took 3 years to avenge Isabella's death. He hunted down every person responsible and ended them, some with mercy and some without. Afterward, he forged a single unbreakable rule that came to define his entire reign. No one was ever to harm a child in Vasquez territory. Breaking that rule meant you simply vanished. Not arrested, not given a warning, you were just gone. For 28 years, that rule had never been broken. For 28 years, the memory of Isabella still shattered his sleep. Now, he found himself watching another broken child in her slumber, and the past bled into the present until they were one. Victor materialized beside him, silent as ever. "What's the plan for her?" Dominic's gaze remained fixed on Emma. "I'm going to do what I wish someone had done for Isabella." Victor gave a slow, understanding nod, asking for no further explanation. Dominic's phone buzzed. "Marco, report." Marcus Kane, 38 years old. He's a small-time dealer for the Santos crew. Address is 1847 Ashland Avenue, 3rd floor. His record shows assault, domestic violence, and possession with intent, all minor stuff. He's a nobody. What else? He's looking for the girl, and he's desperate. Been on the phone all night. The word on the street says she knows more than she should. Apparently, she saw things and heard names that she was never supposed to. Dominic's hand tightened around his phone. "What names?" "We don't know yet, but Santos is getting nervous. A 7-year-old girl has his whole operation on edge. That tells me she's either incredibly valuable or incredibly dangerous, possibly both. Dominic looked over at Emma, who slept on, clutching a pillow as if it were a life raft. Find out what she knows, and find Marcus Kane. He ended the call. Victor watched him with a calculating look. Santos isn't going to appreciate us getting involved. I don't give a damn what Santos appreciates. This could spark a war, Dominic. At last, Dominic turned from the window. His dark eyes were filled with a cold, unyielding certainty. Then let a war begin. It was 6:30 in the morning. The sun was still hours away. Chicago remained dark, frozen, and quiet. But Dominic was not asleep. He sat in the back of a black sport utility vehicle, watching the city blur past the tinted glass. Victor was at the wheel. A second vehicle with 4 of his men followed close behind. 1847 Ashland Avenue, 3rd floor. The apartment building itself looked like it was in its final days. The walls were cracked, and broken windows were patched with cardboard and duct tape. Graffiti was scrawled over every available surface. It was the kind of place people came to fade away. It was the kind of place where no one would ever hear you scream. They took the stairs. The elevator had been out of service for years. The stairwell reeked of stale urine and rotting trash. The crunch of used needles echoed under their boots. On a floor above, a baby was crying. 3rd floor, apartment 312. Victor didn't bother knocking. One powerful kick was all it took. The doorframe splintered, and the lock ripped from the decaying wood. The door flew open, slamming against the inside wall with a loud crash. They moved in quickly, weapons raised, their eyes methodically clearing every corner. The apartment was tiny. A single room acted as a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom. The bathroom didn't even have a door. Garbage was piled everywhere. Empty bottles, scorched spoons, and needles were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Marcus Kane was gone, but he had left someone behind. A woman was lying on a mattress in the corner. There were no sheets or blankets, just a bare, stained mattress shoved against the wall. She was trembling, not out of fear, but from withdrawal. Her name was Lily Sullivan, and she was 26 years old. She could have passed for 40. Her cheekbones were sharp points under skin as thin as paper. Her eyes were so sunken they looked like dark holes in her skull. A road map of angry red track marks covered both of her arms, crisscrossing from her wrists to her elbows. She was only wearing a tank top and underwear. The shirt hung from her skeletal body, like a flag on a day with no wind. When 5 armed men stormed into her apartment, she didn't let out a scream. She made no attempt to run. She hardly moved at all. She was too far gone in her sickness to register fear. "Marcus send you?" Her voice was a dry, broken whisper, wrecked by years of smoking, screaming, and long stretches of silence. "Tell him I'll get his money soon. The girl will be back. She always comes back." Dominic stood just inside the doorway, observing her. This was Emma's mother. This empty, wasted shell of a person had brought that little girl into the world. She was supposed to have been her protector. Instead, she had traded her to strangers for drug money. "How much?" Lily blinked, her eyes struggling to focus. "What? How much did you get for your daughter?" "I didn't sell her." Lily clawed at her arms, her fingernails leaving fresh red lines on the scarred skin. "It wasn't selling, it was more like renting. It's temporary. She always comes back. She's a good kid. She knows to be quiet." Dominic felt his world shrink to a narrow point. His hands slowly clenched into tight fists. Every single instinct was screaming at him to walk across that room and extinguish this woman's worthless life. Victor placed a firm, grounding hand on his shoulder. "She's not worth it," Victor said, his voice low. "She isn't worth the stain it would leave on your hands." Dominic took one deep breath, then another. He looked at Lily Sullivan and saw a person with nothing left to save. There was no regret, no guilt, not even a basic understanding of the damage she had caused. There was only an addict, waiting for her next fix, annoyed that a group of strangers had interrupted her misery. "Take her," he commanded. Mandatory rehab. A private facility, out of state. She is to have no contact with Emma. She will not come anywhere near Emma. Not unless I say she can. Two of his men stepped forward. Lily didn't fight them. She didn't have the energy. "Where's Emma?" she mumbled as they pulled her up from the mattress. "I need her. Marcus is going to be angry if she's not here. She's supposed to work tonight." Dominic turned his back on her. He couldn't stand to look at her for another second. He began to walk through the apartment, searching for something he hoped he wouldn't find. The closet door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It was maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet deep, with no light and no ventilation. A thin, crumpled blanket was on the floor. Next to it was a stuffed rabbit. Its fur turned gray from years of use, and one of its ears was missing. It had clearly been cherished once, a very long time ago. Now it just looked exhausted. And on the wall, there were scratches. There were hundreds of them, gouged into the plaster by tiny fingernails, all arranged in groups of 5. Tally marks. Emma had been counting the days, counting the hours, counting the minutes for someone, anyone at all, to come and rescue her. Dominic bent down and picked up the small rabbit. As he held it in his hands, he felt something inside his chest harden and turn to solid stone. Marcus Kane was going to die. That part was already decided. But before that happened, he was going to suffer. The moment Marcus Kane turned onto Ashland Avenue, he knew something was very wrong. He had spent the entire night searching for Emma, checking all the usual places, the back alleys where the homeless kids slept, the shelters that didn't ask too many questions, the street corners where runaways tried to sell what little they had left for a meal. Nothing. The girl was just gone, vanished like a puff of smoke. Now, as he climbed the stairs to his apartment at 7 in the morning, he could feel that wrongness settling deep in his bones. The door was open. Not just unlocked, but wide open, barely hanging on its hinges. He drew his gun and carefully stepped inside. The apartment was completely ransacked, every drawer emptied. The mattress was overturned. Every single hiding place he'd ever thought of had been discovered and torn apart. Lily was missing. Emma was missing. And scrawled across the wall in black spray paint was a single, chilling name. Visquez. A cold dread washed over Marcus. He fumbled for his phone and dialed his connection in the Santos gang, his hands trembling. "It is Kane. I have got a problem. We are aware." The voice that answered was ice cold. "Vasquez has your girl. The news is all over the South Side. I need some help. I need to—" "You need to handle this." The voice cut him short. "That little girl witnessed things. She was present at the Hernandez transaction. She was in the warehouse when we met with Councilman Peters. She knows our names. She knows our faces." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. It all came flooding back. The times he had used Emma as a prop, thinking a child would make him look less threatening. The time she had sat quietly in a corner, watching as he handled his affairs. She had been a witness to everything. "If she starts talking," the voice went on, "a whole lot of people are going down. Important people. People who are a lot more valuable than you are. She will not talk. She is only 7. She has no idea what she saw. Vasquez has her in his possession now. Do you honestly think he will not ask her questions? Do you think he will not piece together what she knows?" There was a long silence. "Find that girl. Either you make her quiet, or we will make you quiet. You have 48 hours. The call ended. Marcus stood there, alone in the wreckage of his apartment, finally understanding that he had made a catastrophic mistake. 30 miles to the north, in a farmhouse encircled by dense woods, Emma Sullivan slowly opened her eyes. For a second, she was completely disoriented. The room was filled with light. Sunshine poured through real windows that had real curtains. The bed she was on felt incredibly soft, and the sheets were fresh and clean. The air carried the scent of lavender and baking bread. It felt wrong. Everything about it was completely wrong. Emma's heart started to pound in her chest, which felt tighter and tighter. She could not get enough air. She quickly got out of the bed and backed herself into a corner of the room. Her back was pressed hard against the wall, her knees were pulled up to her chest, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. There was too much open space, too much brightness, and it was far too quiet. Something terrible was about to happen. It always did. The door creaked open. Emma flinched, pushing herself even further into the corner. An older woman entered, perhaps 58 or 60 years old. She had short, practical silver hair. Her eyes were kind, set in a face that looked like it had seen too much hardship, but had chosen to keep smiling anyway. She did not come any closer. She did not say a word. She just lowered herself to the floor about 10 feet away from Emma and simply waited. The minutes ticked by, 5, then 10, then 15. The woman remained perfectly still. She did not fidget or try to break the quiet with meaningless chatter. She just sat there, as patient as a stone. 20 minutes passed. Emma's voice shattered the silence like a sheet of thin ice. "Are you planning to hit me?" "No," the woman replied. "I will never do that. That is what they all say." "I am aware," the woman acknowledged with a slow nod. "I can see why you would not trust me. Talk is easy. Promises are cheap. I will show you with my actions, not with my words." Emma observed her, searching for any hint of a lie, any trace of hidden malice. She could not find any. "Who are you?" "My name is Elena. This is my house. You are safe in this place." "Safe?" Emma echoed the word as if it were from another planet, part of a language she did not understand. Elena got to her feet slowly. She went to the door and retrieved a tray that was sitting just on the other side. On it were toast, eggs, a glass of orange juice, and a small bowl of fruit. She placed it in the center of the room, not so close that it felt like a threat, but not so far that it seemed like a trick. Then she went back to the door. "Eat whenever you feel ready. Take all the time you need." And then she was gone. The door remained open. Emma looked at the food, then at the wide open door, and then back at the food again. She was completely confused. Why was she not locked inside? Why was no one standing guard over her? Why was she getting food without having to do any work for it? Nothing about the situation made any sense. But the aroma of the warm meal wafted toward her, and her stomach clenched with hunger. Slowly and with great caution, she began to crawl toward the tray. 3 days went by at Elena's farmhouse. 3 days of fresh linens, hot meals, and doors that were never locked. 3 days of sunshine streaming through the windows and grown-ups who spoke in gentle voices and never lifted a hand to her. Emma did not trust a single moment of it. She ate the meals they provided, but only after she had seen someone else eat from the same pot first. She took the clean clothes they offered, but kept her old, ripped shirt tucked away under the mattress, just in case. And she would not sleep in the bed. Every single night she would crawl underneath it. The space was cramped, dark, and confined. It reminded her of the closet. It was the only place that felt safe. Elena saw all of this but did not say a word. She knew that healing was a process that could not be rushed. 8 other children were living at the farmhouse. Each one of them was damaged in their own unique way, and each one of them was slowly learning how to become whole once more. At first, Emma kept her distance from them. She would sit in. She understood it all too well. "How long have you been in this place?" she asked. Her voice was raspy from not being used. 2 years. Elena rescued me when I was 7, just like you. Do you have to do any work? Maya looked confused. Work to be allowed to stay here? Do you have to go on errands or do favors for people? The question hung between them like a toxic cloud. Maya slowly shook her head. "No, we do not have to do anything like that. We just get to live here. That is all. That is not logical. I am aware. It did not seem logical to me at the beginning either." Emma hugged her knees even closer to her chest. "Then why does she let us stay? What is in it for her?" Maya considered the question for a little while. Then she said something that caused a crack to form in the wall around Emma's heart. Elena believes that looking after children is its own reward. She tells us that we do not owe her a thing, except for getting well again. Emma just stared at her. "Let me tell you what I have figured out," Maya continued. "In this house, we get 3 meals every single day. No one ever hits us. No one ever touches us in the middle of the night. No one ever locks us up in closets." She took a breath, and we are allowed to cry. When things are painful, we can cry, and no one ever gets mad at us for it. That night, Emma crawled under the bed, just like she always did. But this time, Maya crawled under there with her. They lay next to each other in the complete darkness, their shoulders nearly touching. "I have not cried in 2 years," Emma whispered. "The last time I cried, Marcus broke my finger. He told me that crying was for weaklings. Marcus is not here any longer. I am aware. So you can cry now if you need to." Emma remained motionless for a long time. Then, her entire body started to tremble. It was not because of the cold, but because of something much deeper. The tears started as a slow trickle, then came more quickly, and then they all came rushing out at once. She cried for the closet, for the burns on her skin, for the mother who had sold her, and for every single night she had spent feeling hungry, terrified, and all alone. For every single time she had wished that she could just vanish. Maya put her arms around Emma and held her tightly. She did not say a word. There was nothing to say. She just stayed there, holding on until the tears finally stopped and Emma had drifted off to sleep. The following afternoon, Dominic showed up. He stood just outside Emma's room, peeking through the small opening in the doorway. She was sitting at a little table with crayons scattered in front of her, trying to draw something on a sheet of paper. She had never held a crayon in her life. She had no idea how to draw, but she was giving it her best effort. Elena came up to stand beside him. "She has been asking about you." Dominic looked over at her. "What?" "She refers to you as the man who makes the bad people go away. She was curious about where you had gone." Dominic did not say anything. "She does not know your name," Elena added in a soft voice. "You never shared it with her." He looked back through the doorway. Emma was fully absorbed in her drawing, with the tip of her tongue sticking out slightly, just like children do when they are concentrating. He pushed the door open all the way and walked into the room. Emma looked up. For a few seconds, neither of them said a word. Then, a change occurred in her green eyes. A spark that had been extinguished for a long time flickered back to life. It was not trust, not quite yet, but it was the very first sign of hope. Dominic did not get any closer right away. He remembered how his mother had interacted with Emma. The space, the patience, the gentle refusal to crowd or intimidate her. He sat down on the floor, about 6 feet away from the little table where Emma was focused on her drawing. He was close enough to have a conversation, but far enough away not to be a threat. Emma watched him get settled. Her body had tensed up the moment he came in, a purely instinctual reaction, but she did not run to her corner. That was a sign of progress. "Have you made Marcus disappear yet?" Her question was straightforward and businesslike, just as she always was. "Not yet," Dominic replied with honesty. "But I am going to." Emma thought about his answer. She went back to her drawing, added a couple more strokes, and then looked at him again. "What is your name?" "Dominic." She tried to say his name. "Dominic." The sounds came out awkwardly, tumbling over one another. She scowled. "Dominique." A small twitch appeared at the corner of Dominic's mouth. It was the shadow of a smile. He had not smiled in many years. He had not even felt the desire to. "It is a difficult name," he acknowledged. "Some people just call me Model, Dom." Emma tried out the name. It was short, simple, and easy for her to say. "I like that name better." "Then you can call me Dom." She nodded, looking pleased with the decision, and went back to her drawing. A comfortable silence settled between them. It was the kind of quiet shared by two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. A few minutes later, Emma proudly held up her paper. I made this for you. Dominic leaned in a little closer to get a better look. The drawing was simple, made with clumsy lines and rough shapes. It was clear that Emma had never held crayons before she arrived. She didn't really know how to make a picture, but the image was still perfectly clear. There were two figures. One was very tall, drawn with a black crayon, and the other was small, drawn in yellow. The small figure was standing just behind the tall one, as if hiding there, being protected. This one is you, Emma said, pointing to the tall figure. And this is me. Dominic took the paper from her, holding it as carefully as if it were made of spun glass. He stared down at it for a long, silent moment. Something deep inside his chest cracked open. It wasn't the sharp, painful break of loss he was used to. This was something new, something that felt like warmth slowly spreading across frozen earth. 28 years ago, he had been forced to watch his sister die. He had lived through 28 years of guilt and fury and a profound emptiness. And now, a 7-year-old girl with green eyes and a broken spirit had drawn a picture of him as her protector. It's beautiful, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Emma tilted her head to one side. You're not just saying that? I do not lie to children. Marcus lied all the time. I am not Marcus. Emma looked closely at his face, giving him that same searching stare she always did, as if she were hunting for any sign of a lie. She found none. Dominic's phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from Marco. Urgent. Call now. He stood up, making sure his movements were slow and deliberate so he wouldn't startle her. I have to go take care of something, but I will be back. Emma's eyes flickered, showing just a brief flash of fear before she quickly hid it. Do you promise? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Dominic looked at this small child who had endured things that would shatter most grown adults. This child who had literally walked through hell and somehow found her way to him. This child who had just drawn a picture of him as her shield. I promise. The words left his mouth before he could even think to stop them. Before he could remember all the reasons he had stopped making promises 15 years ago. Promises could always be broken. Promises only led to disappointment. Promises were just weapons that could eventually be turned and used against you. But looking at Emma's face, at the desperate hope she was trying so hard to just hide, those were the only words he could offer her. I will be back, I promise. Emma gave a slow nod, holding the one-eared rabbit tightly to her chest, the same toy he had pulled from her closet. Dominic left the room and immediately called Marco. Speak to me. Santos has put a price on the girl's head, $50,000 for anyone who finds her. A muscle in Dominic's jaw clenched. For what reason? I looked into it. 3 months back, Marcus took Emma to a meeting in a West Side warehouse. She stayed in a corner, completely silent, like she was not even there. No one paid her any mind. What was the meeting about? It was a payout. Marcus was handing over money to a police officer, Detective Raymond Garza from the Vice Squad. Turns out he has been taking money from Santos for years. Emma witnessed it all. She heard it all, the names, the figures, the dates. Dominic shut his eyes tightly. A 7-year-old girl was now the only witness to a huge web of corruption. It was clear why Santos needed her gone. Find Garza, Dominic ordered. Find Marcus, and triple the security at the farmhouse. I want no one within a mile of that property. He ended the call and glanced back through the window. Emma was right where he left her, at the table, her eyes fixed on the empty doorway, hugging her rabbit, trusting he would keep his word. He would, regardless of the price. At 9 o'clock that evening, inside the Obsidian, every high-ranking member of the Vasquez crew was gathered at the Black Oak table. There were 14 men in all. These were the same men who had seen a small, barefoot girl wander into their meeting just 3 days earlier. Dominic remained standing at the table's head. He did not take a seat. This was not a conversation. Emma Sullivan is now officially protected by this family. His announcement landed with the weight of stones in the silent room. Any person who harms her will face the same consequences as if they had harmed me. Any person who makes a threat against her will deal directly with me. This is not a suggestion. It is not up for discussion. It is the new law. The room was quiet. The men looked at one another. They had been loyal to Dominic for many years. They were aware of his policy regarding children. They knew the story of Isabella. This, however, was a different situation. This was an open declaration of war against Santos, all for a little girl none of them knew until 3 days ago. When the meeting was over, Victor approached Dominic in his private office. You are about to go to war with Santos for a kid you have only known for 72 hours. Dominic poured some whiskey into a tumbler. He did not drink it. He just swirled it in his hand. I am upholding a principle I established 15 years ago. Santos has 300 men. They run the entire narcotics business from here to Detroit. They have police in their pay and judges in their back pockets, and you are challenging them for a single child. If I bend my own code because Santos scares me, Dominic cut in, then the code is worthless. It was never a real thing, just empty talk. He placed the tumbler on the desk. Isabella is dead because our father believed principles could be compromised. He thought some lives were less important than holding on to power. I made a vow that I would never become him. Victor looked at his boss, his friend, the man who was like a brother to him. I just had to be sure you knew what this would cost. I know. Victor gave a single firm nod. Then I will follow you to the end. A couple of hours after that, Dominic's vehicle stopped in front of a warehouse on Chicago's west side. This was Santos land. He went inside by himself. Carlos Elu Mendez was at a table, with 8 armed men positioned around him. He was 53, stocky, with a gray beard and vacant eyes that had seen men fall without a second thought. A grin spread across his face as Dominic came in. Vasquez, showing up in my part of town all by yourself. You have either lost your mind or lost your edge. He shifted back in his seat. I have heard you are sheltering a child, causing problems over one small girl. That is not the Dominic I used to know. Dominic halted about 10 feet away from the table. Marcus Kane harmed a child on my turf. He forced her to move his product. He allowed other men to put their hands on her for money. That breaks one of my laws. Your laws have no power over my men. They have power over every person in Chicago. Mendez let out a laugh. That girl has seen too much. She witnessed events. She heard names. She is a risk we cannot afford. She is 7 years old. She is a witness, and witnesses have a way of vanishing. That is the way of our world. Dominic's tone remained level. It did not get louder. It did not shake. Then you tried to make her vanish. The air in the room grew cold. The smile on Mendy's face disappeared. His men stirred, their hands inching closer to their firearms. Are you making a threat against me, Dom? I am making a fact clear. Emma Sullivan is mine now. If a single person from Santos gets close to her, I will reduce your whole enterprise to rubble. Every single warehouse, every hidden cache, every last man. I will continue until only cinders remain. Mendes just stared at him. The quiet grew longer. 10 seconds. 20. Men on both sides were gripping their weapons. Both were running the numbers, considering the price, and judging the other's determination. Mendes noticed a look in Dominic's eyes that gave him a reason to hesitate. It was a look of pure certainty. It was a force that you couldn't buy, threaten, or reason with. This fight wasn't over land. It wasn't over business. This was purely personal, and when things got personal, men became unpredictable and dangerous. Mendes carefully leaned back, moving his hands clear of his weapon. Marcus Kane is my mess to handle. I will take care of him. The girl is your responsibility. Make sure she stays quiet. She will not say a word. How can you be so sure about that? Dominic started walking toward the door. Because there will be nothing for her to talk about. He left without a single glance back. From behind, Mendes watched him leave with suspicious, narrowed eyes. "That one is going to be a problem," one of his guards mumbled. Mendes remained silent. He was already doing the math on what a war with Vasquez would cost him. It was too high a price for now. But the girl remained a loose end, and loose ends often found ways of tying themselves up. It was 3:12 in the morning, 5 days after the meeting with Mendes. Marcus Kane was hidden in the tree line behind Elena's farmhouse, his eyes scanning the windows for any sign of life. He had no faith in Mendes. He had no faith in anyone. The Santos boss had ordered him to back off, to let the situation cool down, to be patient. Marcus was finished with being patient. That little girl had destroyed it all. His entire operation, his reputation, his own safety. Each day she remained alive was one more chance for her to talk. He had brought in 4 men, outsiders, freelancers who took cash and didn't ask questions. They had no ties to the Santos family, no allegiances to anything but the money. It cost him $10,000 just to find the farmhouse. A guard on Vasquez's payroll, a man who cared more about money than his own life, had given up the location. Now, Marcus watched his team slip through the trees, like shadows moving within shadows, nearing the house from the back where security was lightest. Inside the farmhouse, Emma's eyes flew open. She couldn't say what woke her. Maybe a noise, or just a feeling. The same gut instinct that kept her breathing in Marcus's apartment for 2 years. Something was terribly wrong. She stayed completely motionless under the bed, listening intently. Maya was asleep next to her, her breathing soft and even. Then she saw it, outside the window, a shadow shifting against the glow of the moon. Emma didn't let out a scream, and she didn't give in to panic. Her body automatically shifted into survival mode. She gently reached over, placed her hand over Maya's mouth, and gave her a soft shake. Maya's eyes shot open. Emma held a finger to her own lips. "They are here," she whispered. No questions, no hesitating. Maya knew exactly what was happening. The 2 girls slid out from underneath the bed and moved into the hallway. Their bare feet were silent against the wooden floors. Elena's room was located at the very end of the hall. Emma gave a soft knock. Once, then twice. The door opened in an instant. Elena was standing there in her nightgown, her eyes wide awake and alert. She had not been sleeping either. "How many?" she asked in a low voice. "I saw one person outside my window. There might be more." Elena moved with speed. Decades of living in this dangerous world had trained her to act without thinking. She pushed a small button concealed behind a painting on the wall. It was a silent alarm that would instantly notify Dominic and Victor. "Wake the others," she ordered quietly, "and bring them to the kitchen." 3 minutes later, 8 children were gathered in the kitchen, drowsy and bewildered, but completely silent. They had all been taught to be quiet when the adults told them to. Elena revealed a hidden door located behind the pantry. Stone steps descended into blackness. "Everybody go down now. Stick close to each other. Do not make a sound." The children began to move down the stairs. Emma went at the very end, helping the smaller ones with their footing. Elena took Maya's arm and pushed a phone into her hand. "If anyone who is not me comes down these stairs, you call the only number saved in this phone. Do you understand?" Maya nodded. Her face was pale, but her eyes were full of resolve. Elena shut the hidden door right as the front door of the house burst open. 4 men rushed in with their guns drawn, their faces hidden by black masks. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, putting herself between them and the kitchen. "There is nobody else here but me." One of the intruders let out a laugh. "Nice try, old lady. We know all about the kids, and we know about the girl." He hit her across the face with the back of his hand. Elena stumbled against the wall but managed to stay on her feet. A trickle of blood ran from her split lip. "Search the entire place. the man commanded. Find her. They rampaged through the house, checking bedrooms, bathrooms, and closets. They discovered empty beds. They discovered toys and clothes and all the signs of children, but they could not find the children themselves. That is when Marcus Kane stepped through the shattered doorway. He stared at Elena with cold, empty eyes. Where is Emma? She is gone. She is far away from here. You will never find her. Marcus covered the distance between them in 3 long strides. He grabbed Elena by the throat and violently slammed her against the wall. Do not lie to me, old woman. Where is she? In the basement. Emma heard Elena's cry of pain. She looked at Maya, at the other children huddled together in the dark, and at the phone shaking in Maya's hand. Victor was on his way. 8 minutes out, maybe even less. But 8 minutes was an eternity. Elena would be dead in 8 minutes. Emma made up her mind. She got to her feet and walked toward the stairs. Emma, no, Maya hissed in a desperate whisper. But Emma was already going up. She pushed the hidden door open and stepped into the kitchen. Then she calmly walked into the living room, where Marcus was holding Elena against the wall with his hand wrapped around her neck. I am here. Every single person turned. Emma stood there in her pajamas, looking so small and thin and breakable, staring at the man who had tortured her for 2 long years. Let her go. I am the one you are looking for. Marcus let go of Elena and turned to face Emma. His eyes were filled with a cold rage. 2 years he had controlled this child. 2 years he had used her. And she had run straight to the one man in all of Chicago who could bring it all crashing down. You have caused me a great deal of trouble, little girl. Emma just stood in the doorway, her arms hanging at her sides, her chin held high. She did not run. She did not cry. She had used up all of her tears a very long time ago. I know. Marcus stormed across the room. His hand shot out and grabbed a handful of her hair, pulling her off her feet. Emma gasped from the pain, but she refused to scream. You are coming home with me, Marcus hissed, his face just inches from hers. And this time, you will learn how to stay quiet for good. Behind him, Elena struggled to get up. One of the masked men kicked her hard in the stomach. She crumpled to the floor, fighting to breathe. Emma looked directly at Marcus, into the eyes of the monster who had burned her, starved her, and locked her in closets. The man who had let strangers touch her for money, and she felt something she had never once felt around him before. It was not fear, it was certainty. Dom will kill you. Marcus just laughed. It was a sharp, hideous sound. Vasquez? He does not care about you. You are nothing, just a skinny little drug runner. Why would the most powerful man in Chicago ever risk a thing for trash like you? Emma's voice was completely steady and clear, the voice of someone speaking the absolute truth. You do not know anything about him. A flicker of something crossed Marcus's eyes. It was a shadow of doubt. The confidence in her voice did not fit the situation. It did not match what he would expect from a terrified child. Before he could say another word, the night exploded. Gunfire erupted from outside. It was the sound of automatic weapons, of screaming, of men dying. Victor had made it in 6 minutes, faster than should have been possible. He had broken every traffic law in Chicago to get there. His team descended on the farmhouse like a force of nature. The 4 hired guns were taken down in a matter of seconds. They had been expecting an old woman and a group of kids, not professional soldiers. Marcus spun around toward the back door, dragging Emma along with him. She was now his shield, his one and only way out. Victor appeared in the hallway, his weapon raised, his face like it was carved from stone. He had a perfect shot at Marcus's head, but Emma was in his line of fire. Marcus held her tightly in front of him, his arm locked around her throat as he backed toward the exit. Do not get any closer, Marcus yelled. I will snap her neck. Victor did not move an inch. His gun remained level. His eyes followed every single one of Marcus's movements. Emma looked at Victor. Their eyes locked. And in that one instant, Emma understood. She understood the geometry of it all. She understood that Victor could not take the shot. She understood that Marcus would get away with her if she did not do something. She was 7 years old, and she was calculating angles like a soldier. She knew exactly what she had to do. She had learned it from 2 years of living with violence. The only weapon she had ever truly had was her own teeth. Emma turned her head and sank her teeth into Marcus's arm with every bit of strength in her tiny body. She bit down until she tasted blood, until she felt the flesh tear. Marcus screamed in agony, and his grip loosened for just half a second. Half a second was all it took. Emma threw her body to the side, dropping to the floor and rolling out of the way. Victor fired a single shot. The bullet hit Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to his knees. His gun fell and skittered across the floor. Victor walked forward, weapons still raised, and stood over the bleeding man. "My boss will be the one to decide what happens to you." Marcus looked up, clutching his shoulder as blood poured out between his fingers. "She is just a kid. Why does Vasquez care so much about some worthless kid?" Victor's expression never changed. "You would not understand." Not. Against the wall, Emma sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her body had begun to shake uncontrollably. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her with the cold reality of what had almost happened. For the first time all night she was trembling, but she was alive, and Marcus would not harm her ever again. Dominic's car sped through the darkness at 100 miles per hour. He was 20 minutes out when the silent alarm went off. A 20 minutes that seemed to stretch into 20 years. Victor's voice came over the phone, composed and unwavering. "We got her. She is secure. We have Marcus. Secure. She is secure." Still, Dominic did not ease up on the gas until his car skidded into the farmhouse drive, where all the lights were on and his men were posted at every door. He stepped over the remains of the front door. The living room was destroyed. Smashed furniture, stains of blood on the flooring, and holes from bullets in the walls, all evidence of the fight that almost took another young life. He discovered Emma in the kitchen. She was huddled in the corner, with her knees drawn up to her chin and her arms hugging herself. Elena was next to her, with an arm draped over Emma's shoulders, a dark bruise forming on her cheek, and dried blood on her mouth. They were both hurt, but they were both breathing. Dominic walked over and crouched before Emma. "I am so sorry." His voice broke as he spoke. "I am so sorry I did not get here sooner." Emma gazed up at him. Her green eyes looked huge in her small, pale face. She examined his face just as she always did, checking for any hint of a lie or a trick. She saw none. All at once she threw herself at him, her arms flying around his neck. The force of it almost sent Dominic to the floor. She held on to him with a powerful grip, her little frame trembling, her head pressed into his shoulder. And at that moment, she began to weep. These were not the quiet tears he had seen from her before. This was something else entirely. This was the sound of a child who, at long last, felt safe. It was the sound of years of hurt pouring out all at once. Dominic put his arms around her with great care, very gently, and just held her. He had not held a child in 28 years, not since Isabella. He had made a point to avoid it, because the memory of his loss was too much to handle. But as he held Emma, he sensed a change deep within him. A part of him that had been ice for almost 30 years started to melt. "You came back," Emma cried against his shoulder. "You actually came back. I made a promise. No one ever keeps their promises. I keep mine." He stayed with her until the tears ended, until her breathing became calm, until she was fast asleep in his arms, completely worn out. After that, he brought her to one of the bedrooms, placed her gently on a fresh bed, and pulled a warm blanket over her. He remained there for a while, watching her sleep. Then, he left to handle Marcus Kane. The warehouse was deserted and quiet, an ideal place for discussions that needed to stay private. Marcus was bound to a chair, his shoulder poorly wrapped in a bandage, his face white from losing blood. A pair of Dominic's men were on guard, but Dominic sent them out. He needed to do this by himself. He dragged a chair over and sat directly in front of Marcus, so close he could see the terror in his eyes. Have you ever heard the name Isabella Vasquez? Marcus just shook his head. His teeth were clicking together. It was from the chill, from the dread, and from the certainty that he was about to die in this room. She was my sister, Dominic explained in a low voice. My twin sister. She was only 8 years old when they took her life. They forced me to see it. They treated her like a pawn, like a bargaining chip, like an object they could throw away when it had served its purpose. He moved closer. You did the exact same thing with Emma. You treated a little girl like she was an object. You traded her, you hurt her, you shattered her. You believed she was insignificant because she was little and had no power. Marcus made an attempt to talk. I had no idea she had anything to do with you. I swear I did not. It would have made no difference, Dominic cut him off. Every child has to do with me. Every single child in this town is protected by me. That is the one rule I created after Isabella was gone. The one rule that you violated. He got to his feet. My sister was never avenged. No one was held accountable. Our father allowed the men who killed her to go unpunished because a war would have cost too much. Dominic drew his firearm. I am not my father. A single shot. It was quick. It was over. Marcus Kane fell forward, gone before his brain could register the event. Dominic put his weapon away and left the warehouse. The air outside was crisp and cool. He called Victor. It is finished. Take care of the cleanup and ensure Santos gets the word. What word is that? Dominic tilted his head back to the night sky. That no one is ever allowed to harm my children. A week following the assault, the farmhouse was deserted. Dominic relocated all of them to a different site, a house that could not be found on any map, a compound with superior defenses, taller fences, and a security detail that was always awake. The kids adjusted with ease. They were all accustomed to relocating on a moment's notice, to abandoning one place without a second thought. It was a common tool for survival among them, and Emma adjusted right along with them, in a unique way. She simply would not let Elena leave her side. When Elena went to the kitchen, Emma was right behind her. When Elena walked into the garden, Emma watched her every move from the window. If Elena was gone for longer than a minute, Emma's breathing would become shallow and fast. Her eyes would fixate on the door, and she couldn't settle down until the older woman came back. Maya was the only other person Emma would allow to get close. The girls had formed an unbreakable bond since the night of the incident. They shared a room, took their meals together, and spoke in a silent language of shared looks and tiny gestures that only survivors could ever comprehend. Dr. Sarah Chen started visiting every other day. She approached Emma with patience and care, earning her trust one session at a time. After 2 weeks of careful observation, she shared her findings with Dominic. She has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, an attachment disorder, and cognitive delays from a complete lack of schooling. She is 7 years old, but her emotional state shifts wildly between a terrified toddler and a 40-year-old war veteran. There is no in-between. Dominic absorbed the news without a word. The good news, Dr. Chen added, is her incredible resilience. With steady care, ongoing therapy, and a stable environment, she has a real chance to heal. However, this will be a journey of years, possibly even decades, and she absolutely cannot face any more turmoil. No more turmoil. Dominic was determined to guarantee that. 3 weeks after the assault, Lily Sullivan asked for a meeting. The court-ordered rehabilitation program had started to work. 3 weeks clean from heroin had lifted the mental fog. She could finally think clearly, feel things again, and the overwhelming feeling was one of need. I want to see my daughter. Dominic faced her from across a table in a cold, sterile room at the rehab center. His expression was a blank slate. No, she is my little girl. I have my rights. You traded your daughter for drugs. You allowed men to pay to put their hands on her. You gave up any right you thought you had. Lily started to weep. tears rolling down her gaunt face as she clasped her hands together in a desperate plea. I was not in my right mind. I had no idea what I was doing. I have to have her. She is the only thing I have left. Please. Dominic observed her, seeing the tears and hearing the desperate words. But he also saw the truth that lay beneath it all. Lily did not want Emma out of love. She wanted Emma as a crutch, a purpose, a reason to justify her own life. Without a daughter to look after, she would be forced to face the truth. That was not love. It was desperation disguised as caring. My mother will handle this. He got up and left the room. Elena sat down in his chair. She offered no pity. Her words were sharp and direct. Do you have any idea where Emma slept for 2 years? Lily just shook her head. She was in a closet that was 3 feet wide. There was no light. She had no blanket, only a thin sheet she pulled from a trash can. Lily's expression shattered. Do you know the last time she was in a school? There was no reply. She was 5 years old. She is unable to read. She is unable to write. She does not know when her birthday is. She does not know her own full name. Elena leaned in closer. Can you remember the last time anyone said the words, "I love you" to her? The silence in the room felt heavy and suffocating. You will not be allowed to see Emma until you can prove that you deserve to be her mother. That could take years. It might never happen. That is not up to me or my son. That will be a choice for Emma to make when she is old enough. Lily began to sob. What can I possibly do? You need to get well. Not for Emma. You must do it for yourself. You owe that much to the person you were before the drugs took control of your life. 2 days after that, Lily was moved to a long-term recovery center in a different state, a long way from Chicago, a long way from Emma. She was gone without a final visit with her daughter, and Emma did not ask for her, not even one time. She never questioned where her mother went, never wondered if she was still alive, and never asked if she would return. It was as if Lily Sullivan had been completely erased. And that quiet, that total lack of interest in the woman who brought her into the world was the most painful part of the entire situation. 2 months went by. The weather began to change. Winter finally released its cold grip on the city of Chicago. Piles of snow melted into mud, which then hardened into firm earth. The sun stayed out a little longer each day, and Emma started to transform. It began with learning to read. A private teacher visited 3 times every week. She was a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, who was an expert in helping children who had experienced trauma. She never forced the lessons. She never applied any pressure. She just sat with Emma, introducing her to the alphabet, one letter after another. Emma's mind, finally free from the constant burden of survival, showed an amazing capacity to learn. She soaked up knowledge the way dry ground soaks up a fresh rain. Letters transformed into sounds. Sounds transformed into words. Words began to have meaning. After 6 weeks, she spoke her first written word out loud. Safe. S-A-F-E. She looked toward Mrs. Patterson. What does that word mean? It means you are protected. It means that no one is able to harm you. It means you no longer have to live in fear. Emma just stared at the word on the page for several moments. I have never known this word before. Mrs. Patterson remained quiet. There was nothing she could say. This was a child who had never learned the word safe because she had never known what it felt like. Dominic came to visit every single weekend. He would show up on Saturday afternoon and would not leave until Sunday night. He never gave long speeches. He did not try to break the quiet with pointless chatter. He simply shared the same room with Emma, allowing her to get comfortable with him being there. They eventually developed a routine. Dominic would bring a new book, starting with simple picture books, and then moving to stories that were a little more grown up. He would sit on the sofa while Emma sat on the carpet close by, listening as he read the story to her. One Saturday, she did something new. Instead of sitting down on the floor, she walked over to the sofa and paused. Can I sit up there with you? Dominic looked at the little girl who had spent so much of her life sleeping in closets and corners, a child who still flinched at quick movements, a child who trusted nobody. Yes. She got up on the sofa and sat down next to him, not touching him, keeping a careful space between them, but they were now on the same level, as equals. Dominic opened the book and started reading. He did not smile, but a subtle change came over his face. Something inside him softened. Victor was standing in the doorway, observing. He noticed the difference in his boss, the way the ice was melting and the barriers were breaking down. He turned around and quietly walked away. Some things were just too personal for anyone else to see. The small improvements added up over time. Emma began to call Elena Grandma instead of just the lady or her. The word sounded uncertain at first, like she was testing it, expecting to be corrected. Elena just smiled and replied, "Yes, my dear." The drawing Emma had made during her first week there, the simple sketch of a tall person and a small person, was now kept under her pillow. She would look at it each night before she fell asleep. Maya and Emma had become sisters in every way that was important. They decided to share a room. They would tell each other secrets after the lights were out. They taught one another lessons that no young person should ever have to learn, and they recovered from their pasts side by side. Then, the legal matter came up. The court had officially ended Lily Sullivan's rights as a parent. The proof against her was impossible to ignore. Neglect, abuse, endangerment, and using a minor in drug trafficking. Emma was in need of a legal guardian. Elena brought up her idea at Sunday dinner. After Emma had been put to bed, she said, "I want to formally adopt her." Dominic put his fork down. "You would be a wonderful mother for her. That is not what I was asking. She requires a stable life. You are able to give her that." Elena reached over the table and held her son's hand. "Dominic, I am not asking who is the best person to raise her. I am asking you if you want to be a part of this little girl's life." He did not reply right away. He thought about Isabella, and the vow he had made at her gravesite, and the strict rule he had established, and the conflict he almost ignited. He thought of Emma, of her green eyes and her silent strength, and how she had drawn him as the one who would protect her. He thought about his own future, a future that he had always believed would be desolate and cold and lived all alone. I do not know the first thing about being a father. No one ever does, until they have to be. Dominic glanced up the stairs, toward the bedroom where Emma was sleeping. What if I am a failure to her? Elena gave his hand a gentle squeeze. But what if you are not? Dominic did not give his mother an answer that evening. He drove back into the city without a word, wrestling with the question in his thoughts like it was a heavy stone he was unable to set down. 3 days went by. He ran his business. He sat through meetings. He made choices that influenced the lives of hundreds of people. But just beneath the surface of every talk, every deal, every order he gave, the question remained. Do you want to be a part of this child's life? He was sitting by himself in his office at the Obsidian, looking at the wall. His world was never intended for children. He was a killer, a criminal, a man who had ordered deaths and had seen men die without even blinking. His hands were covered with blood that could never be cleaned. He had rivals who would not hesitate to use anyone he cared about to get to him. He had seen what happens when strong men have weaknesses. He had experienced it firsthand. Isabella had died as a result of it. How could he possibly bring a child into all of this darkness? How could he ever promise Emma that she would be safe when safety was something he could never truly provide? But then, he started to remember. He saw Isabella's face, her smile with the gap in her teeth, and the way she called him Dom because she could not pronounce his full name. He recalled the promise he made at her grave, that no child would ever be harmed in his territory, that he would be the guardian his own father never was. And he saw Emma, the way she came into his club with bare, bleeding feet, and asked him if he was the one who could make evil people go away. The way she had offered to do work for him because she knew of no other method to get protection. The way she had come out of the basement to stand up to Marcus, willing to sacrifice herself to keep Elena from harm. Emma was not just inside his territory anymore. She was inside his heart. And that single fact changed absolutely everything. On the fourth day, Dominic returned to the safe house. He saw Emma in the garden, seated on a wooden bench, watching butterflies float above the spring flowers. Mia was standing close, but Dominic requested a moment alone with Emma. Mia walked away. Emma did not move. Dominic took a seat next to her on the bench. Their feet hung down at two different levels. His were flat on the ground, while hers dangled in the air. Emma, there is something that I would like to ask you. She looked over at him. Those green eyes had already witnessed too much. That face had learned to anticipate pain. Would you want to come and live with me and Grandma Elena? Not here at this house. In a real home, a home that will be yours forever. Emma's face showed no emotion. She was thinking, weighing the options, looking for the catch. You want to have me? I want you to be a part of my family. A long silence passed between them. Then she started asking questions. They were careful, systematic, the kind of questions a child asks when she has learned that nothing is ever free. I would not have to do any work. No, I would not have to go deliver any packages. Never again. I would not have to do any of those things for men. Dominic felt his heart break. Never. Not in your life. Not for a single person. I would just have to be there. That is all. He reached his hand out very slowly, giving her a chance to move away, and he took her little hand into his. All you have to do is be my daughter. That is all. Emma looked down at their hands together. His was large and covered in scars. Hers was small and delicate. And then her face began to fall apart. The tears started to flow. Not the quiet, frightened tears that she had shed in the past. These were completely different. These came from a place buried deep inside of her, a place that had been sealed off for many years. She cried because someone actually wanted her, not for something she could do, not for something she could give them. They just wanted her for being herself. I want to, she whispered as she cried. I want to more than anything. She launched herself into his arms. Dominic caught her and held her tight. And then something occurred that had not happened in 28 years. Tears began to stream from his own eyes. Tears flowed down his cheeks, landing gently in Emma's hair, and he made no move to stop them. This was the ghost. The man who left no evidence behind. The leader who never showed a hint of weakness. But there he sat in a sunlit garden, holding a 7-year-old girl and sobbing. He wept for Isabella, the one he failed to save. He wept for Emma, the one he could. He wept for the man he once was and the one he was becoming. The adoption itself was completed in 4 months. By the book, it should have been much longer. There were background checks, home inspections, court dates, and mandatory waiting periods. The entire system was built to be slow and cautious, to shield children from rash choices. But Dominic Vasquez had attorneys who knew the right judges. He had connections with officials who owed him. He possessed the kind of resources that sliced through red tape as if it were thread. It was not exactly corruption. It was just a different kind of efficiency, born from years of working in the gray areas between the law and the lawless. On a clear Tuesday morning in June, Emma Grace Sullivan officially became Emma Grace Vasquez. The courtroom was intimate, with wood-paneled walls, an American flag standing in the corner, and a judge who offered a warm smile as she signed the last of the documents. Dominic was dressed in his finest black vest over a crisp white shirt. He wore no tie, as he never did. Emma was in a blue dress. Blue had quickly become her favorite color over the last few months. It was the color of a cloudless sky. It was the color of feeling safe. After the judge declared the adoption final, Emma gazed up at Dominic. "So what should I call you now?"
"Whatever you want," he told her. She considered this, her brow furrowing with the same focus she had when trying to sound out a new word. "Can I call you Dad?" Dominic felt his throat tighten. It had been 28 years since he had even dreamed of hearing that word. 28 years had passed since Isabella was taken from him. It was then that he swore he would never have another child. He would never risk loving someone who could be stolen away. He was too choked up to speak, so he simply nodded. Emma's face lit up with a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and brightened her entire being. "Okay, Dad."
Standing behind them, Elena quietly wiped away her own tears. Victor remained by the door, his arms folded and his face a mask, but his eyes were glistening. Life began to fall into a new rhythm. Emma went to live at Elena's house full-time. It was more secure than any of Dominic's properties, and it was a calmer, more suitable home for a child. But Dominic visited every single day. He would show up in the afternoon and stay all the way through dinner. He helped her with schoolwork. He read her stories before bed. He started picking up skills he never thought he would need. Elena showed him how to braid hair. It took him 2 full weeks to get a basic braid right. His large, powerful hands felt clumsy handling the delicate strands. Emma would sit with perfect patience while he practiced, never once complaining when he tugged too hard or had to begin again for the 5th time. Emma, in turn, taught him how to make pancakes. He burned the first 4 batches before creating something they could actually eat. The kitchen filled with so much smoke that the fire alarm shrieked twice, forcing Elena to throw open all the windows. Through it all, Emma's laughter filled the air. Dominic had never heard a more wonderful sound. Maya was adopted as well. Elena was firm about not separating the girls. They had found solace in each other during a dark time, and she insisted they would grow up together in the light. The first time Emma called Dominic Dad in front of anyone else, it was in front of Victor. They were in the living room as Victor arrived to give a report. Emma came racing down the stairs, clutching a sheet of paper. "Dad, Dad, look at my spelling test. I got a perfect score." She launched herself at Dominic, who caught her with ease. Victor stopped dead in the doorway. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room. Dominic met the gaze of his most loyal man, his oldest friend, and he witnessed a crack appear in that stoic, blue-eyed facade. Victor turned on his heel and left without saying anything. Elena found him a little later, sitting out on the porch and staring into the distance. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I have known him for 20 years, Victor said in a low voice. "I have never seen him truly happy. Not one single time. Not until she came along." A year after the adoption was final, Emma brought home a reading exam with a perfect score. She had been the student who struggled the most when she started school, the little girl who barely knew her alphabet, the child who had never been read a book. And now, she was at the top of her class. She burst through the front door, the test paper held tight in her hand, and found Dominic in the living room. "Dad, I did it! I can read everything now!" She jumped into his embrace. Dominic held her close and looked at the test. It was covered in red check marks, a perfect score, and a shiny gold star sticker. He folded the paper with great care and tucked it into his wallet. It would remain there for the rest of his days. 3 years went by. Emma turned 10. She was in the 4th grade, not just keeping up with her classmates but often outperforming them. She had good friends, she had a loving family, she had a life that the 7-year-old girl who once appeared at the gates of hell could never have dreamed of. And then, Lily Sullivan returned. The notification came as a formal letter from Dominic's lawyers. It was polite and written with great care. Lily had been sober for 2 years. She had finished a rehabilitation program. She had started a new life in a different state. And now, she wanted to see her daughter. Dominic's immediate reaction was to refuse. He crushed the letter in his hand and hurled it across the room. He had seen 3 years of healing, 3 years of growth, 3 years of watching Emma rediscover how to smile, laugh, and trust again. He would not allow that woman to tear it all down, but Dr. Chen advised him against it. Emma has to be the one to close this chapter, on her own terms, not yours. She is 10 years old now. She is also a survivor of profound trauma, Dominic countered. If you deny her this choice, it will leave her with questions that will haunt her forever. Let her be the one to decide. Dominic raised the subject with Emma that weekend. They were sitting in the garden on their favorite bench, the very same spot where he had first asked if she wanted to be part of his family. Your birth mother would like to see you. Emma's face became perfectly still, showing that old survival instinct. Why? She says she is better. She has been clean for 2 years. She wants to say she is sorry. Do I have to go see her? No. You never have to do anything you do not want to. The choice is completely yours. Emma gazed at the flowers, the butterflies, and the blue sky. She spent a full week thinking it over. Then she came to Dominic with her decision. I want to see her. There is one question I have to ask. The meeting was arranged at a neutral site, a quiet office with plain walls and comfortable chairs. Dr. Chen was there, and so was Dominic. He took a seat in the corner, a silent guardian, ready to intervene the second Emma showed any sign of distress. Lily Sullivan entered the room. She looked transformed, much healthier than before. Her face was fuller, her eyes were bright, and her hair was clean and neat. She was dressed in simple clothing with no makeup. She looked like the person she could have been in a different life. A life before the drugs, before Marcus, before it all fell apart. The moment she saw Emma, she burst into tears. Oh, my baby, you are so big now. You are so beautiful. Emma remained perfectly still. She sat in her chair with her hands clasped in her lap, her expression calm. She observed her birth mother's tears with the detached air of someone watching a stranger. Sit down, Emma said. I have a question for you. Lily sat down across from her daughter, her body shaken by sobs, her hands trembling. You can ask me anything, please. I will tell you the honest truth. Emma looked straight into her mother's eyes. Why did you not protect me? The question landed with the weight of a stone in a silent pool. Lily's face contorted in pain. She tried to form words, but nothing came out. She tried again. I was sick. The drugs. They made me so sick. I was not thinking right. I could not see what he was doing. I was so trapped in my addiction that I could not. You let Marcus burn me. I know. You let him lock me in closets. I know. You let men pay money to touch me. At that, Lily shattered. She bent over, sobbing uncontrollably, struggling to breathe. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. There are no words I can say. Nothing is good enough. I was your mother, and I let you down. I failed you in every way. Emma just watched her cry. There was no anger or hatred in her gaze, only a deep, quiet understanding that seemed far too old for a 10-year-old. I forgive you. Lily looked up, her expression one of pure shock. But I will never forget, and I do not want to live with you. I have a family now, a real family, a dad who keeps me safe, a grandma who adores me, a sister who gets me. She stood up from her chair. I hope you are able to build a good life for yourself. Not for me, but for you, because you deserve to be more than what those drugs turned you into. Lily could only nod slowly, tears still tracing paths down her cheeks. You are so strong, so much stronger than I ever was. I had to be, Emma replied. She walked over to Dominic and took his hand. Just as they reached the door, she glanced back one final time. Goodbye, Lily. Not Mom, not Mother, just Lily. The name of a stranger who once gave birth to her, and nothing more. They left the room together, father and daughter, and never looked back. 8 years later, Emma Vasquez was 25 years old. She was in her office on the 3rd floor of a restored building in the heart of Chicago. The sign on the glass door read, Isabella's Light Foundation. It was named for a little girl who died when she was 8 years old, for the sister Dominic had lost. It was named for the reason he had become the kind of man who could save Emma's life. The foundation had already helped over 500 children get out of situations just like the one Emma had once endured. 500 kids who might have been lost to the system. 500 kids who finally found someone ready to fight for them. The clock on her wall read 2:30 in the morning. Emma was still at her desk. She frequently worked late. The children who were in the most danger did not follow a 9 to 5 schedule. Her phone began to ring. It was the emergency hotline. It was the number that was always awake. Isabella's light. How may I help you? There was only breathing on the line. It was unsteady, frightened, and then a tiny voice emerged, the voice of a child, a little boy. Are you the one who makes the monsters go away? Emma's world froze. 18 years vanished in a heartbeat. She was 7 again, standing barefoot and bleeding before a stranger's door, asking that very same question. Yes, she replied gently. I am. My name is Lucas. I am 6. My stepdad is trying to find me. My mommy cannot help me. She is scared too. I am hiding in the bathroom of a gas station. Please. I do not know who else to call. Emma was already in motion. Lucas, you need to listen to me very carefully. Everything is going to be all right. Keep hiding. Do not make a single sound. I am sending help to you this very minute. They will get there in 20 minutes. Can you keep yourself safe for 20 minutes? I think so. You are being so brave. You are the bravest boy I have ever spoken with. She sent out her rapid response team, a special unit financed through channels Dominic never formally confirmed. It was made up of ex-soldiers and former police officers, people who knew how to rescue children from terrible situations without a trace. 20 minutes later, Lucas was out of danger. Emma met the team at the Tasi Foundation's reception center. The boy was wrapped in a thick blanket, clutching a mug of warm milk with both hands. He looked small for his age, with faint bruises on his arms that he kept trying to cover with his sleeves. She saw herself in every part of him. Emma knelt to bring her eyes to his level. Lucas. He glanced up. His eyes looked ancient, far too old. They were the eyes of a child forced to see things that no one should ever see, just as hers had once been. Are you really going to help me? Emma gently took his small hand. I want you to listen to me. What you did tonight, calling someone for help, asking to be saved, that is the most courageous thing a person can ever do. I know that because I did it myself, a very long time ago, and somebody came for me. Somebody saved me. And now, it is my turn to save you. Lucas's expression crumbled. He launched himself into her arms and began to sob. Emma held him securely, feeling his little body tremble. She felt the 18 years of her own struggle come full circle in that one embrace. She gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in that city, Dominic was likely sleeping. He was 56 years old now, enjoying his retirement and living a quiet life with Elena, who, at 76, still managed the shelter, still protecting children, and still refusing to take it easy. Emma thought of Isabella, the girl whose picture Dominic always carried in his wallet. She was the sister whose death transformed a broken man into a guardian, and her name was now a beacon for countless lost children. She thought of herself at 7 years old, barefoot and bleeding, knocking on the door to a living hell in search of an angel. And in that moment, she knew the circle was now whole. 18 years ago, she was the child who needed to be rescued. Tonight, she was the one who answered the call when another child cried out for help. That is the way love works. That is how healing is passed on. Someone saves you. Then you go on to save someone else. The chain is never meant to be broken. The circle is meant to continue. Lucas leaned back and wiped away his tears. What is going to happen now? Emma gave him a warm smile. Now, we are going to give you something you have never had. A safe home, a real family, and the chance to just be a kid again. Is that even possible? I am living proof. She stood up and took his hand. Side by side, they walked into the light. 18 years ago, I was a lost child wandering in the darkness, hoping someone would come and fight for me. Today, I am the one who fights, because that is the nature of love. Someone saves you, and then one day, you become the one who saves someone else. The circle always remains unbroken. This story teaches us an incredible lesson about the strength of the human spirit. It shows that no matter how difficult our lives become, hope can appear in the most surprising of ways. And when we are given help, we gain the strength to become helpers for others. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and tapping the notification bell so you will not miss any of our daily inspirational videos. Please give us a like and share this video with a person who might need to hear this message today. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had a moment where the kindness of a stranger changed everything for you? We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. We read each and every one, and your personal stories give us the inspiration to make more meaningful content. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a valued member of our community. We wish you great health, lasting happiness, and peace in your everyday life. May you always be able to find light, even in the darkest of times, and the courage to help others when they need it most. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. Please take care of yourselves and each. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.